This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Rainbow Nation. The Rainbow Nation, because of its cultural diversity, it is a country that went through one of the hardest times in history due to colonialism, and apartheid was part of a history that is forever aged in this country. We are in South Africa. Now, when we talk about South Africa, let's talk about things that stand out. Talk about their rugby, talk about their football, cricket, And Kenya, actually, our coach today is from South Africa, and he says he will go down history because the first goal to be scored in South Africa during the World Cup was his goal, right? So now let's go to our proverb today. The ox always takes the first hit. The ox always takes the first hit. How would you interpret that?
The ox always takes the first hit. Interesting. All right. My interpretation is, an ox represents strength. An ox represents, for very many African family and farming communities, the ox is actually used to plow. So I would think, and then unfortunately the ox. So for me, I'm looking at it in terms of food security and providing food for the family. The ox is the one that goes and tills the virgin ground and does the heavy lifting. And then unfortunately, if there is a misfortune in that African family, it is the ox that also gets sacrificed to feed the visitors. So that's just my quick interpretation of it. So yeah, it carries a huge burden literally on its back. And providing food and it becoming food. Yeah.
All right.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
A lot of I don't know how many communities do that happens a lot in the western part of the country.
Yeah.
Where the bull is offered as a sacrifice.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about South African communities are very communal, they're very social.
Yeah.
So so they would what happens in Western Kenya probably would also happen down there. So that's just my quick interpretation of that. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So even as we get into this conversation, we're looking across the border. And when we look at regional integration, one of the key elements of regional integration is trade. Trade and how you're able to open up your trading agreements from country to country. And say that you open up those corridors and allow that to happen so that there can be a robust environment between which these two countries, it could be bilateral, it could be multilateral, but you're opening that up essentially so that you have a good business relationship, even as you're in the same regional bloc. Kenya and Tanzania seem to be in the throes of what could be simmering into a bit of a conflict. This comes about, there have been certain things that have been said, but not as overtly as the most recent announcement, where Tanzania, in a new policy, has blocked foreigners from engaging in 15 key economic activities, including retail hairdressing, mobile money transfer services, phone repairs, small-scale mining and real estate agency, as well as tour guiding, and other small-scale businesses. Now, when they made this announcement, maybe you can tell us if they were targeting Kenya specifically or if they were doing this for all countries that may have been involved in this. It just so happens that the number that we hear of is closer to 50,000, 40,000 plus Kenyans who are in these particular industries that Tanzania has said we're not going to be able to do this anymore. Does it pose a problem?
It does pose a problem. So my interpretation of Tanzanian's pronouncement, and yes, you are right to, actually that's actually the makings of a very good analyst in Yundu, because when you say Kenyans being targeted, that was my exact interpretation. And I know the Tanzanians won't like this, but it is a political season, and two things are happening from my own interpretation. One, protectionism. The Tanzanian government, knowing it's an election year, are trying, and they are losing popularity because of draconian laws that have been imposed over a period of, the current president's regime. They're trying to gain back favor by showing Tanzanians. One of the biggest problems Tanzanians have been complaining is the same problems you're seeing in Kenya, hard economic times, and for Tanzanians claiming that some of the things we would have done, Kenyans are much better than us. So populism, let's call it populism. So the Tanzanian regime trying to get re-elected on a populist wave that we have given, put food back. I mean, we've given you a chance to put food on the table. That is number one. And number two, deeper and more sinister in my perspective, is the fear of the freedom of speech and the human rights that Kenyans enjoy. So if your figure is correct, 40 to 50,000 Kenyans in Tanzania, and look at the sectors that President Samia Suluhu and government have banned. It's the small SMEs, the hair salons, the mobile transfer, let's call them the M-Pesa shops, the trading, the hawking, all those things that Kenyans would really do, and Kenyans are pretty aggressive. One of the biggest fears within Tanzania's government is this being an election year and seeing that the regime is losing popularity, that Kenyans are going to export their revolution, their political revolution across the border. So even though they will not vote, they will easily say, people, it's like Kenyans are inciting Tanzanians, stand up for your rights. Don't agree to be repressed. And this new wave, you remember what happened to our activists, the ones who had gone to try and support Tundu Lissu, the opposition leader. So this is a repercussion of that. That not only are Kenyans going to come from abroad and come and, open up this democratic space, the ones who are already working within could be a catalyst to inciting Tanzanians to think differently. So there's those two things. Populism for the regime to try and win back popular support from its citizens, that we have given you a platform to make money, we've kicked out the foreigners. So I feel, even if other East African countries' nationals are in Tanzania, I feel Kenyans are going to take the biggest hit out of this, because we are the most aggressive, we are the most enterprising within the region in that sense. And it is Kenya that is going to lose the most.
Dr. But then again, what does this do to the regional integration as per the EAC vision and mission? We talk about a regional integration where a Kenyan would be able to get to Tanzania, do business, and live there easily. We talk about going to Uganda and being able to do that. But if this decision is made and other East African countries decide to retaliate, then where does the hope of EAC being one unified bloc and even get to the monetary policy, what does this decision do to the aspirations of the bloc?
Good question. Of course, it derails the whole regional integration vision. Remember, Africa is trying to integrate at some point, and it starts by the regional blocs integrating. So the EAC, the four pillars, a customs union, monetary union, market union, and then ultimately political federation, which for me is, long-term coming. But Tanzania has always been the weak link in the region moving forward. For every 10 steps the EAC moves forward, Tanzania always takes us, 20 steps backwards.
How so, Doctor? I would like you to expound on that just a little bit. How does Tanzania come in a position where it takes the regional bloc backwards?
It takes us backwards because, like the Common Markets Union, when you're supposed to really open up those borders for free trade and everything, Tanzania has always been protectionist. Tanzania has always been afraid of letting other nationals go and work in for the longest time without work permits and all that. And I largely think this is largely because of their history and the fact that, their Ujamaa policy. It really, they took a beating on the Ujamaa policy. It worked well, and Mwalimu Nyerere had the right vision for his country, but just how they operationalized their socialism agenda kind of took them backwards. So you'll find, in terms of even education, very many Tanzanians who are able to go and seek their education either in Kenya or in Uganda, in other East African countries. So it is Tanzania just being afraid that they will be overrun and overtaken if they allow other nationals of the East African community to go into. So for the longest time, they're always throwing in small roadblocks. Today it's this issue, tomorrow it will be another issue, and it's always Tanzania doing this. So I believe they need to kind of understand that it is opening their country up and allowing their citizens to be exposed to tougher and stiffer competition that they will actually grow. If you allow people who are better than you, to come and stay within your vicinity, guess what happens? Transfer of skills, transfer of just the business acumen. Tanzanians find Kenyans as in fact they say we are a bit too aggressive for their liking. The aggression is not just in how we carry out our things. Kenyans are go-getters. Kenyans are hustlers. So you'd understand, if you look at the latest complaint, is that Tanzanians complain that Kenyans are undercutting us. Undercutting simply means the Kenyan will go the extra mile to get that shilling. A Kenyan will probably do something which our culture has taught us that Tanzanian will not be willing to do. The Kenyan will go the extra mile of after-sales service, really try and persuade clients and customers, things that probably the Tanzanians haven't been able to catch up to. So it's populism, and they need to open up their country if at all they want to grow, if they want their citizens to also, understand and see how Kenyans are doing it, and probably the citizens over a period of time will pick up and do the same thing.
But I have a question. I will try to go back to that conversation of Kenya being targeted.
Yeah.
And Tanzania has a history of implementing, these policies that then restrict or clamp down on businesses for foreign nationals. And like you said, they're being protectionist. So it's protecting the local interests and forcing compliance. Sometimes that's what they argue. But if we just go back a few years and just look at a trail and a pattern, which will now lead to the question. Look at 2017, 2018. There was a crackdown on Kenyan traders and businesses at that time.
Yeah.
And this was when Magufuli was president. Yeah. And their approach was, especially Kenyan truck drivers, were repeatedly blocked from entering Tanzania, or they were deliberately delayed at the Namanga and Holili border posts. So the impact then was that Kenyan milk that was being exported to Tanzania, Kenyan maize being exported to Tanzania, and other agricultural products were banned or heavily taxed.
Yeah.
Now, that was 2017, 2018. When it comes to 2018 itself, actually, that was 2017, then you had deportation of what they call foreign nationals. Majority were Kenyans. And we had a lot of engineers, a lot of teachers who were actually then deported because of lacking working permits in Tanzania. Then we go back to 2019, where then there was the suspension of Air Tanzania flights to Kenya, and then Tanzania revoked licenses and said, okay, you know what? We are also going to deny you landing rights. We're also not going to land in Tanzania because of the COVID protocols. We still come back to 2021, 2022, the EAC disputes over taxation and licensing. Tanzania again imposed stricter regulations and higher duties on goods that were especially coming from Kenya. So in all this, the pattern clearly is, as much as you're then targeting other East African countries, Kenya is heavily affected by a lot of these things. My question is, why bother courting a girl who's playing hard to get, and this girl doesn't want to be found? Why does it seem to feel like Kenya is at a losing end every time we're having these Kenya-Tanzania discussions? They almost appear to have the upper hand.
Okay, it's very interesting the way you've put it. Okay, granted, look at it this way. Kenya and Tanzania has always envied Kenya's enviable position or hegemonic position within the East African community. And Tanzania believes that because they have Dar es Salaam as a port and Kenya has Mombasa, Tanzania can be the alternative to the region, to the landlocked countries like Rwanda, Burundi, Eastern DRC and such regions. So when you undercut Kenya's businesses, and it's a retrogressive way of thinking, but nation states act in their own interest. It's a retrogressive way of thinking. Tanzania has always felt that if we can undercut Kenya's business leadership or the position that Kenya holds enviably in the business world, we can try and raise our economy. These issues, you remember Magufuli burnt our cheeks. The chicks, the chicks that were burnt. Then the Maasais who strayed into, they didn't stray. They've always used those as grazing grounds. The Maasais who were jailed and their cows, I can't remember whether they were auctioned or what happened to their cows. This trade wars, it is simply Tanzania envying Kenya's hegemonic position within the region. And granted, in international relations, we say nation states act in their own interest. Sometimes those interests are detrimental to everybody else other than what they deem best for themselves. So we will continue with this part. This problem will get solved at the summit. Either Iyala will raise it up. I saw our minister, trade minister, say he had written already to his counterpart. I saw the Prime Cabinet Secretary in Kenya say he had written to his counterpart in Tanzania. It will be escalated to the summit. The presidents will sit, the summit, and the heads of state will sit. It will be solved. But I can assure you, 2 years down the road, it will be something else.
And Edgar, and that there goes my point. It's not the first time.
It's not the first time.
He has discussed Tanzania issue.
Yeah.
Somebody's just reminded me, 2023, Tanzania again introduced policies aimed at limiting operations of foreign-owned tour companies.
Yeah.
The target was again Kenya.
Exactly.
So it's in all sectors. It's in tourism, it's in agriculture, it's just trade.
Yeah.
And the question is, because Tanzania keeps doing this, and we keep bringing this up at the summit, like you're saying, and you're rightly saying it, then we'll still go back again.
Yeah.
Then we'll have other fights, then we go back to the table. It's this discussion. Why? What's the point?
It's a neighbor who has decided that, I will not, you are number one, but I'll not make it easy for you. You're ahead of us, but I'll not make it easy for you. So at every point, it is also Tanzania trying to say, you will not ignore me in the region. I am also a voice to be heard in the region. I mean, it sounds very petty, but that's how statecraft is. That's just what international relations is all about. Because like the one you talked about, the tour drivers, Kenyan tour drivers being blocked from, Masai Mara and Serengeti, I think, are connected. Yeah. So when you block this van, and there are no border posts right in the middle of that wild conservation area, when you block this tour van or start being discriminatory, without realizing that this same tourist has visited the Kenyan side and will eventually come to the Tanzanian side, without realizing in liberalism something we call a win-win, that you can win and I can win also. We can leverage on our synergy and get a win-win situation. Tanzania has decided to play petty politics, for lack of a better term, where we will undercut you at every corner. You will listen to us. You will recognize and that we are also a voice to reckon with within the region. And granted, Kenya, I hope, is not going to go down those petty politics. I'll digress and show you. Remember President Kibaki? The Migingo issue between Kenya and Uganda.
Yes.
So Uganda decides to make the Migingo issue an issue. All right. President Kibaki looks at it. Some of his advisors are telling him, let's show our might. Kibaki tells them, look here. President Kibaki tells them, Uganda buys a lot from us. If we start going on a war over this small island in the middle of Lake Victoria, we are losing the bigger picture. So what does Kenya do? Let the Ugandans do whatever they want to do with Migingo Island, but will they continue importing from us? So you look at the bigger picture, and that is what Kenya is doing right now. If you see Kenya bending over backwards to try and mend fences or to try and have this discussion, it's not because we cannot do without Tanzania. Of course we can do without Tanzania. But now remember Ndu's figures, 40 to 50,000 Kenyans who are earning...
Just those are business owners.
Those are business owners.
Prime Cabinet Secretary talked about 250,000
There
Kenyans living in Tanzania, and then the majority of them business owners. But anyway,
So you look at the bigger picture. Let's do a multiplying factor. Assuming all those 250,000 Kenyans working there support 4 Kenyans, so we're talking about 1 million Kenyans whose lifeline depends on what is happening in Tanzania. So you don't pick a petty fight with this. Listen to them, humor them, listen to what exactly they are saying this time round. Refer them back to the East African Common Market Protocol and tell them, based on the non-discrimination, based on the trade, you're breaking these laws, how can we solve it? How can we go forward? All the time what you're trying to do is safeguard the livelihoods of the Kenyans and the taxes that they remit back at home and the support they bring back at home to Kenya. So I think Kenya is playing the bigger brother, the bigger person here by reaching out to them. But in essence, we could do without them and really survive, actually, If you asked me, and I know probably this may not be the best statement, but let me say it, Tanzania needs Kenya more than Kenya needs Tanzania. Granted. Yeah.
Dr. What would happen in a situation where, okay, fine, Kenya is now playing the bigger brother, right?
Yeah.
But remember, this decision affects the larger EAC.
Yeah.
So what would happen if the other countries as well decide to isolate Tanzania and tell them, we do not need you, you need us?
Yeah, exactly.
What would we be looking at in terms of retaliatory decisions by other countries? Because Kenya might be a bigger brother, but Rwanda, Uganda might not be.
Exactly. So, and that's now the short-sightedness of the Tanzanian leadership in realizing that you have begun a fight that you cannot win. Why can't you win? You're in the East African community. If the other countries decide to retaliate, to your question, Tanzania will be left with no choice but to threaten to or actually withdraw from the East African community. Remember, they are a member of SADC. Exactly. So they could say, our interests are going to be served in SADC, EAC, it's been real, and they walk out. Okay, who loses? Of course, there are people who lose. There are so many Tanzanian students within Kenya and Uganda because of our stronger education system. Companies and foreign direct investors in Tanzania sometimes prefer employing, and this is now where the beef is. They prefer employing Kenyans and Rwandese and Ugandans. Number one, because of English and just acumen and work ethic and all that. So Tanzania has catching up to do. And so if they were clever, they should have bid their time. They should become like countries like China. Let the foreigners come in, teach you, learn from them, and then eventually when you have the capacity, you can quietly ease them out of your system without any animosity, and then you're left with the capacity. So Tanzania currently doesn't have that capacity. And it is the Swahili saying, what is that Swahili saying? It is spiting the midwife while pregnancies are still going on. So Tanzania is doing this to its East African neighbors, Kenya and especially Kenya, without knowing our human resource to an extent helps them run their economy. If we, for example, they were able to kick out all the foreigners from their soil, assuming that's the direction they want to take, there are very many sectors of their economy, I don't want to use the word would grind to a halt, but would face serious challenges, and Tanzania's economy would just go back. So this is being short-sighted. If all the other countries retaliate, in diplomatic terms, they say reciprocity. You've kicked us out, now we are doing the same to you. Tanzania would be the loser.
Let's take a break at this point and come back and discuss. There have been, sentiments, there's, gaining the chatter across board that perhaps Tanzania is not really interested in an EAC, camaraderie anymore, and that where its interest lies is actually in SADC. And then one would say, okay, if this is the way that we say, well, maybe would you then see a situation whereby Tanzania could focus? We look at the AU selection, and it is said widely that Tanzania did vote with the SADC bloc, and was not necessarily interested in what was happening over here with the EAC. We'll look at that when we come back and see how that then does harp on any kind of decisions that we made into the future, and let's look at that retaliatory reciprocity, as it were, when we come back. Dr. Edgar Githua is an international relations expert joining us this morning as we discuss what's going on between Kenya and Tanzania. Is it brewing, or are we just looking at something that will simmer out? We'll come back and discuss this when we come back from this break. It is now 23 minutes to 8 o'clock. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room. The only way to start your day.
And it's been said in very many circles that Tanzania has been leaning on the SADC side rather than the EAC side. What benefit would they have by, having tentacles deeper in a SADC integration than with the East African community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for them, from a rational perspective, there's something called the rational choice theory. We say countries are rational actors, and they do a cost-benefit analysis at any one given time on the decisions they make. So staying in SADC and EAC benefits Tanzania by allowing them to get the best of the South and the best of the Eastern region. So it is just, and all nation states are this way, it's just greed at its best. You want to get the best of both worlds. Now, sometimes these countries that are members of multiple regional blocs find themselves at crossroads when they have to now juggle and balance relationships across all these, extended, multifaceted boundaries. So Tanzania, in my view, stands to benefit more from the EAC than SADC, because in EAC, it facilitates transport logistics for Rwanda, Burundi, Eastern DRC, and language is not a barrier for it. Tanzanians can go into, Swahili now is taught in Rwanda, in Uganda, in Kenya, it's here, right here. So from a perspective of socio-economic and cultural integration, Tanzania benefits more from the East African community. Of course, it also benefits from SADC, but now SADC, like we were rightly saying during the break, has its big boys, South Africa, and even the culture of the southern countries is a little bit different from Tanzania. So if Tanzania was to try and probably push for an angle to withdraw from the EAC and remain in SADC, it would realize that it is losing a lot of benefits from the East African region, because now Rwanda and Burundi now, depending on now what SADC rules are, Rwanda and Burundi might just be caught up between, do we do trade with Tanzania, which is a SADC country? Are our goods safe at their port? All those questions come into mind. So it is in the interest of Tanzania to stop all this saber-rattling and, rocking the boat from within in the East African community, and just move the region and move forward with the region. If there are issues, for example, if they felt that Kenyans are over-aggressive in certain aspects of their market, SMEs, it's very easy to solve that. Create like a quota system. Say, we are not blocking Kenyans from all these businesses, but we will have a quota. Once we have Kenyans registered, let's say, once 5,000 Kenyans are registered in a particular type of business, we cannot register anymore. And Kenyans will understand. So Kenyans will know, if you go to Tanzania, do not first ask, which of the following businesses can you register for, can you do?
Yeah.
Instead of kicking us out. Yeah, because we don't kick Tanzanians out of Kenya.
Do you think it is, do you think it's an issue of kicking Kenyans out more than it is a political insular issue whereby popularity, again, populism comes into play, and that this is something that after an election at the end of the year, that this will then be a non-issue?
But the problem is, it could be that cheap political. It could be a PR exercise, all right? Pretend you've kicked out the Kenyans and not really kick them out, or kick them out temporarily and then find a way of bringing them back. But until when? Until when will you destabilize people? You need to move past. Politics sometimes is called petty. You need to move past this petty populism politics, because granted, you've kicked out Kenyans. Your elections are held in October, and then the Kenyans come back in November, and your citizens call you a liar and say you promised you kick out the Kenyans. The fear of the pronouncement, for me, coming from the Tanzanian government, is the risk and vulnerability it exposes Kenyans to. Because remember, the minister said effective immediately. So for me, as an international relations student, I begin to see the danger. The xenophobia that happened in South Africa, something similar or of a lesser extent happening to Kenyans, because Tanzanians will wake up and now come up to your M-Pesa shop and tell you, you are told not to have this business, without understanding that your license has to run out its course, maybe a year or whatever. So there will be Kenyans who will be at a point where they will face discrimination and will face bad treatment from Tanzanians because they have the support, or they think they have the support of their government. That is the danger of that pronouncement. That is the part that the Tanzanian regime did not calculate, that you're exposing other nationals to xenophobia or outright harassment and discrimination from citizens who may not really understand the workings of the law or how it's supposed to be operationalized. That for me was the biggest danger, because I felt I should have said, a year from now, let it be known by all nationals, all foreign nationals, we are not renewing these licenses. And then you give all these nationals, if you really want them out and you have a genuine intention, a way to ease out of your economy, if that's what you really want to do. But saying effective immediately, for me, stank of populism and, of course, just lack of wisdom, and the fact that you've exposed the nationals of all these countries, not only Kenyans, but the Chinese. I happened to go to Tanzania like some 5-6 years ago, and there's a place called Karioko in Tanzania. It's like our river road, and it's very busy and hustling and bustling. Do you know, I found Chinese hawkers, and they can speak Swahili. And they were selling, what were they selling? They were selling duvets. So he entices you on the streets and tells you, I'm selling you this duvet. Then when you start haggling with him, he tells you, that's my shop right there in Karioko, where you go and find his wife or his relative, a Chinese in Karioko. They dominate those businesses. So the issue here is not that foreigners have dominated Tanzanian businesses. The bigger question for the Tanzanian government is, how do we increase capacity of our citizens to be able to compete with these foreigners on our home ground, on our home soil? So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Ask, how do we improve our own capacity? How can Tanzanian duvet sellers compete with the Chinese? Maybe not on price, because the Chinese probably is getting his at a cheaper, but at least learn the business tricks, or come up with a law that tells these foreigners, granted, I will not refuse you from having the business, but you have to employ some 2 Tanzanians at your business so that you do what? Informal capacity building.
Yeah.
So that eventually after 10, 15 years, when you ease out the foreigners, your people have the capacity.
But Terry, I'm looking at this, and I still go back to my earlier question. I'm looking at all these patterns, Kenya's posturing in the region.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to zoom out, because this is not the first time this has happened.
Exactly.
And I'm just trying to read where is this pattern leading.
Yeah.
And over the years, there's been this growing assertiveness by Kenya when you look at continental leadership.
Yeah.
So you have AU, you have IGAD. There is a way Kenya postures itself, and you look at where Tanzania then is coming from. Just the other day, when Boniface Mwangi and the others were in Tanzania, and Suluhu made a statement, she actually threw a jibe at Kenya because of, and the undertone was, whatever business you think you can run here, because mmedhibitiwa kule kwenu, mwezi kuleta hapa Tanzania.
Exactly.
But then there is the growing interest around how we are managing our own country's affairs that then emboldens a country like Tanzania to look at how weak our systems are and argue, your previous posturing is no longer there. You don't have that same power. You need us more than we need you.
Yeah, there could be a bit of that, and the fact that, granted, especially now, and especially when those activists went to that side and were deported, some were deported, and then some, all those negative things happened to them. Kenya's posture and Kenya's reaction to that may have emboldened Tanzania to also take this extra step. That it looks like currently they would look at the Kenyan regime and probably argue that these are not the former farm governments or regimes that we had in the past. Maybe we can push a little bit and they will not do anything so much. Okay, they need us and all these things. Number one. Or two, back to those figures. If at all it's 250,000 figures, it is knowing the Kenyans are not going to react badly because they have 250,000 of their citizens who cannot get jobs back at home, and they need jobs within our economy. So we can afford to push them a little bit. Yeah, there's a bit of that bullying aspect as well. But I'm thinking, for me, as a political, as international relations political scientist, wired individual, for me, I thought the regime was afraid that these Kenyans could somehow influence the election in terms of the rhetoric. They have made friends, they have made connections within the Tanzanian society. And the revolutionary spirit that is within the Kenyan public, that is what they are mostly afraid of. Kenyans could come and just, create vibes within the system. That is number one. Feeling that, Tanzanians who hung around Kenyans for some time, eventually at some point acquire that same aggressive nature, acquire that same outspoken nature. So when they go back to Tanzania, the people tell them you're behaving differently. It's because you've stayed with Kenyans. So I think Kenyans are causing ripples. I'm not so sure. Maybe Kenyans could be also causing ripples within that society that government is a bit afraid of. Yeah,
I'm trying to look at beyond the politics, and the assumption here is we import a lot from Tanzania.
Yeah, we also,
Going back to, is it a case of Kenya needs Tanzania more than Tanzania needs more of Kenya? I'm looking at the latest available data, 2023. Kenya imported goods worth approximately 54 billion. This is from Tanzania, 54 billion from Tanzania. And we've had truck drivers argue and say, if you look at the number of trucks moving from Tanzania coming to Kenya are more than the trucks of Kenyan trucks moving from Kenya into Tanzania.
Yeah.
Looking at these figures, because we can go to the levels of importing cereals and grains.
Yeah, actually.
Yet Kenya can actually do the same. We are actually importing industrial goods. We're importing livestock products. We're importing fruits and vegetables. We are importing onions and all those kind of things. Even eggs, which you can locally produce. These guys know the numbers. So they're looking at these numbers and then might argue, well, you people need us actually more than we need you. You're importing all these things from us. We decide to close, you'll have to find other alternatives and it will be more expensive. So Tanzania then becomes a very key trade partner with Kenya, but it almost feels like Tanzania at this point appears to be having the upper hand.
So I hear what you're saying, and I buy your argument that there's that way of looking at it. But then from a political science perspective or from an economic perspective, then they are missing the whole point. When you have the upper hand, you actually open that border more, allow more of those goods to come across. You don't become restrictionist. You don't bring about protectionism. You don't impose those 10 to 15% taxes that I had the Minister of Trade talking about that Tanzania is imposing on Kenyan goods. When you hear them imposing taxes, those 10 to 15% taxes on Kenyan goods, it's because those Kenyan goods are of superior quality to theirs. All right? Kenya buys more from Tanzania, not because we need more from Tanzania, but because Tanzania, from time immemorial, has always blocked Kenyan goods from going there. Those underhand tactics, blocking our drivers, all those tiny things that kind of appear like Kenya is not selling Tanzania. But in actual fact, looking at the human resource, Kenya provides a lot of human resource. If we could quantify our human resource now into those figures, I don't know whether that has been factored in. Importation is just one way of looking at trade, international trade. So there is the aspect of what we physically buy. But if we quantify the value of what Kenyan labor gives to Tanzania, if we could quantify that into a figure, Tanzania gets more from. Tanzania needs Kenya more than.
You see, there is another way of looking at it in terms of, fine, Kenya imports more from Tanzania.
Yeah.
Fine, we are the consumers. But then again, one would argue that Tanzania also depends on Kenya because we do not get those things for free. They need our money for the economy to survive, for their farmers to be able to sell their wares. So there is two ways of looking at things.
Yeah, it's symbiotic in that way. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
and then again, you look at a situation where 250,000 Kenyans who are in Tanzania pay taxes in Tanzania. That means Tanzania is enjoying taxes from these 250,000 Kenyans
Correct.
who are working there. But let's look at if xenophobia was to happen in Tanzania, does this then mean that the leadership, the Tanzanian government, then is squarely responsible for atrocities committed to foreign citizens, perhaps?
Correct, exactly. Under international law, they are bound to protect all citizens of whichever country who are legally in their country. I will use the word legally because if you have illegal people who are, if you're an illegal immigrant, yes, granted, your human rights are protected. Those are enshrined in international law, international human rights law. But the formal processes of protecting you, the fact that your embassy is aware you're around, and the rights and responsibilities of any country, you're kind of at a disadvantage if you do not declare who you are as a foreigner. If anything was to happen to right now where Kenyans in Tanzania, if their businesses are vandalized, if their businesses are broken into, if Kenyans come to physical harm because of poor implementation of this directive, Tanzania will be held responsible. Yeah, they'll have a case to answer for that. And those are some of the optics. And then remember, Tanzania forgets that the world is watching. We live in a world that is complexly interdependent. So other foreigners and foreign direct investors are looking at how Tanzania is treating, foreigners on its soil. And they're asking, I was thinking of opening up a factory in Tanzania and employing, let's say, 5,000 Tanzanians. Is that really the destination I need to go to? So the world watching this is also getting repelled. So Tanzania, in the end, will end up shooting itself in the foot because you have declared to the world you're not ready for globalization, which is a fact and it is here to stay. You've declared to the rest of the world that you are not open to competition and you can't live in this world without competition. So there is a picture they are sending about the current regime that is going to be retrogressive. Remember, Tanzanian Airways, I don't know, I've not followed that story. After the human rights violations that were committed in Tanzania on the Kenyans, Tanzanian Airways was banned from flying to Europe. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So that's a chunk of their income also gone. That's bad publicity for them. Now you come up with this directive of shutting out foreigners and locking them out from certain businesses. What image is Tanzania portraying to the world, to the community of global nations? That we are not cooperative, we're not ready for integration, we're not ready for globalization. So Tanzania unfortunately will become a pariah in global politics. And eventually that costs them. It begins costing them from development partners, foreign direct investment. Everybody now starts treating Tanzanians like, oh, you're the people who don't like socializing. You're the people who don't want neighbors. And it's a bad tag to have.
It would be a bad tag for them.
Yeah.
Let's look at the element of reciprocity in the few minutes that we have left.
Yeah.
Because the CS for the Ministry of Trade, Investment, Industry, the big one, essentially Kenyanjui last week, essentially said, you know what, Whereas the tactic that we would employ would not be retaliation. We are not going to take it off the table in terms of something that can be employed to deal with this thing.
Exactly.
Because Kenya could actually then do the same thing. But when we look at the relations between nations, when we talk about reciprocity, is retaliation one of the ones that's used, and can it be employed when you're still trying to foster neighborliness as far as nations' relations are concerned?
Yes, it is. And that retaliation, that reciprocity is, we call it retortion. So at the highest, if Kenya was to protest, the highest protest Kenya would give in diplomatic terms would be to recall our High Commissioner from Tanzania. That is the first step in trying to show the other nation, we're not happy with what you're doing. So you recall your High Commissioner and expel their High Commissioner. You don't even wait for them to be recalled. The moment you recall yours, it's automatic. The Tanzanian High Commissioner in Kenya will also not feel okay. You don't close the embassies. No, you don't. But it is an act of diplomatic displeasure. It is you displaying your highest, diplomatic displeasure in saying we are not happy with the state of our relations. It is a chance for diplomacy now to take place. The presidents meet, the ministers of foreign affairs meet, and we begin this conversation of how can we mend our relations. And what is it that Tanzania you feel we have been not doing, that you've resorted to these underhand tactics in kicking out our citizens and all this. So those things usually happen. But now, guess what, Ndu, back to your question. Assuming all East African countries decide to protest diplomatically, kicking out the Tanzanian high commissioners and ambassadors from their regions, to tell Tanzania you're behaving badly. You see, Tanzania finds itself, the upper hand that Dennis was talking about now, what you thought would work for you, what you thought you'd press for advantage, now puts you at a big disadvantage. And for you to normalize relations, unfortunately, negotiations, you now come at a losing end and you give concessions. So if this backfires on Tanzania, if other East African community nations decide to protest strongly, it will escalate to the level of ambassadors and high commissioners get recalled. And two, Tanzania trying to normalize relations will now come begging and even lose whatever advantage it had before. So it is not a place to go to. I do not know whether the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Tanzania and their trade sat down and had a conversation. I will not be surprised even if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tanzania was blindsided by their Minister of Trade in this blanket declaration, because there are repercussions.
Sure. At the risk of running out of time, and we could be getting into a whole other conversation when we talk about regional blocks and multilateral agreements with, international organizations. But when we look at the African continent, we look at all our regional blocks, save for, one or two, it seems that we're not able to have real unity amongst these regional blocks. Is it possible for nations which are still trying to figure out their issues?
You're taking back to the formation of the OAU.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
There were two schools of thought. The Kwame Nkrumah school that was saying, let's have political federation, let's seek first the political union of Africa. And then the other group
things will be added to us.
And remember, the architects of the other group was Julius Nyerere. He was like, no, all countries in Africa cannot join together. Let us first form our own countries, get our act together. We'll unite at a later stage. African unity is elusive because of a number of factors. Lack of political goodwill of our various heads of state, number one. Two, the differences, and I know this sounds like a cliche and I'll sound like a broken record, the cleavages that were left by colonialism. French West Africa versus the Anglophones versus the Lusophones. We have all those debates. It is not entirely impossible, but we need a change of leadership across the continent at the presidential, at the summit level, because it's lack of political goodwill. And without naming names, there are presidents who have refused to let go of power all over the continent. So we're not blaming anyone in particular. And it is that retrogressive mindset, of people creating small fiefdoms and kingdoms and, playing this retrogressive politics that will eventually make this dream of an African union
even more elusive. Riveting conversation. Definitely insights for us to look into. Dr. Edgar Githua, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. Stuff for us to go off of, and I think and continue to contemplate. And that's why discussions like this are important.
Thank you.
Dr. Edgar Githua is international relations and diplomacy expert, has joined us this morning. Let's see how these things continue to unfold. Asante sana at 9 a.m.
Thank you.
This is the Situation Room, the only way